A single handwritten recipe card found in a kitchen drawer was enough to destroy a millionaire's carefully built empire of lies. Victor Ashford, a man whose pharmaceutical company had made billions from a revolutionary treatment, a man who appeared on magazine covers as a humanitarian hero, found himself unable to breathe when he saw the faded ink on that small piece of paper. The handwriting belonged to his housemaid, Camila Sandoval, her gentle hands that had been secretly treating his dying daughter with homemade remedies. But it wasn't the miracle cure that stopped his heart, it was the formula itself, written in a notation style he recognized from 15 years ago. Why did this one man, who had saved thousands of lives with his patented medicine, collapse at the sight of a maid's handwritten notes? The answer lies in a story of medical theft, a silenced partner, and a daughter's life hanging in the balance of a truth that was about to surface. The Fortress of Success. The Ashford Manor rose from the cliffs of Belmont Heights like a modern-day palace, all glass and white stone, overlooking the sapphire waters of the Pacific. The estate sprawled across 8 acres of manicured perfection in the most exclusive enclave of Westridge Bay, Oregon, a place where tech moguls and pharmaceutical titans built their kingdoms away from the world's prying eyes. Inside the main residence, Victor Ashford stood in his home office, a cathedral of success built from floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of his conquered world. At 49, Victor was the embodiment of accomplished power. His silver-threaded dark hair was precisely styled, his custom-tailored charcoal suit from a Milanese tailor whose waiting list was 2 years long, and his steel-gray eyes held the calculating coldness of a man who had spent 2 decades making decisions that affected millions of lives. The walls of his office told the story he wanted the world to believe. Framed magazine covers from Forbes, Time, and The Economist, all featuring his face with headlines like The Compassionate Capitalist and Medicine's White Knight. Awards from humanitarian organizations. Photos of him shaking hands with presidents and Nobel laureates. A crystal sculpture from the FDA commemorating Ashford Biomedical's contributions to modern medicine. It was all a monument to a lie. Ashford Biomedical had revolutionized the treatment of autoimmune disorders with their flagship drug, ImmunoShield 9. The medication had transformed outcomes for patients with lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and dozens of other conditions where the body attacked itself. The company's market capitalization had soared to $22 billion. Victor himself had accumulated a personal fortune estimated at $3.7 billion, making him the 14th richest person in Oregon and a fixture on lists of America's most influential healthcare leaders. He gave keynote speeches about making medicine accessible. He funded scholarships for underprivileged medical students. He sat on the boards of 3 major hospitals and 2 research foundations. The media loved him. Politicians courted his endorsements. Business schools wrote case studies about his rise from a modest background to pharmaceutical royalty. But beneath the polished exterior, beneath the humanitarian awards and the carefully crafted public image, Victor Ashford carried a secret that had poisoned every success, every achievement, every moment of his seemingly perfect life. That secret had a name, a face, and a formula, and for 15 years, he had believed it was safely buried in the ashes of the past. He was about to discover how wrong he'd been. Victor's wife, Catherine, had left him 3 years ago. Their marriage had been built on the same foundation as his empire: appearances, convenience, and careful management of the truth. When their daughter became ill, when the cracks in their relationship could no longer be plastered over with charity galas and vacation homes, Catherine had chosen to leave. She'd taken a substantial settlement and moved to a penthouse in Manhattan, visiting their daughter once every few months with expensive gifts and shallow affection. That left Victor alone in his glass fortress with the one thing he genuinely loved, his daughter. The dying light. Sophia Ashford was 13 years old, and she was running out of time. Her room occupied the entire eastern wing of the 2nd floor, a suite that had been converted into something between a luxury bedroom and a private medical facility. The walls were painted a soft lavender, her favorite color, but the cheerful decor couldn't hide the reality of the equipment that surrounded her. 4 stands with their clear bags of fluids. Monitors that tracked her vitals with soft, persistent beeping. A hospital bed with railings, though she rarely had the strength to risk falling anyway. A wheelchair she used on her better days. A oxygen concentrator that hummed quietly in the corner for when her breathing became labored. Sophia had Callaway-Brennan syndrome, a rare autoimmune disease so uncommon that only about 300 documented cases existed worldwide. The condition was a nightmare of biological betrayal. Her immune system had essentially declared war on her own body, attacking everything from her joints to her organs to the lining of her blood vessels. Every day was a battle. Every morning she woke up was a small victory against odds that grew worse with each passing month. The cruelest irony was not lost on anyone. Victor Ashford, the man who had built an empire on treating autoimmune diseases, could not save his own daughter. Immunoshield 9, his miracle drug, his legacy, his fortune's foundation, it was useless against Sophia's specific variant of the syndrome. Her body rejected it. The medications that worked for hundreds of thousands of other patients did nothing for her except add side effects to her already overwhelming burden of symptoms. Victor had exhausted every option. He'd flown Sophia to the Mayo Clinic, to Johns Hopkins, to specialized research hospitals in Munich and Tokyo. He'd personally funded 2 separate clinical trials at Stanford and MIT, fast-tracking experimental treatments that might offer hope. He'd consulted with every leading specialist in autoimmune disorders, offering blank checks for their expertise. Nothing worked. Her body continued its relentless self-destruction. The medical team, a rotating staff of nurses, specialists, and her primary physician, Dr. Raymond Chen, had given her 2 years at most. That diagnosis had come 19 months ago. Victor had watched his daughter fade day by day, her energy diminishing, her pain increasing, her childhood stolen by a disease that even his billions couldn't defeat. He'd grown desperate. He'd investigated experimental stem cell treatments in Switzerland, traditional Chinese medicine protocols, even hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Anything. Everything. He was a man who had always been able to buy solutions, and now he faced a problem that refused to be purchased. The helplessness was eating him alive from the inside. Every morning he woke up terrified that this would be the day his daughter didn't wake up. Every business meeting felt hollow and meaningless compared to the battle happening in the lavender room on the 2nd floor. Every success in his company felt like ashes in his mouth when he came home to find Sophia too weak to eat dinner. And then, 3 months ago, something impossible began to happen. The invisible healer. Camila Sandoval had been hired 9 months earlier through Prestige Household Services, an exclusive staffing agency that catered to Westridge Bay's ultra-wealthy residents. Her background check had been impeccable. References from families in Seattle and Portland. Certification in professional housekeeping. A quiet, respectful demeanor that wealthy clients prized. She was 41, slender, with dark hair she kept pulled back in a neat bun, and warm brown eyes that seemed to hold depths of sadness she never discussed. Her job was simple: maintain the Ashford residence. Clean the vast spaces. Prepare meals. Manage the household inventory. Stay invisible, efficient, perfect. Victor rarely interacted with her beyond the occasional nod of acknowledgement. To him, she was part of the house's functioning machinery, necessary but unremarkable. He had more important concerns than learning the name of the woman who cleaned his marble floors. But Sophia noticed her. In the long, painful hours of her days, Sophia noticed everyone who passed through her room. The nurses with their clinical efficiency and pitying smiles. Dr. Chen with his gentle voice and increasingly worried eyes. Her father with his desperate attempts to stay positive while she could see the fear consuming him. And Camila, the quiet housekeeper who moved through her space like a gentle breeze, always careful, always kind. Camila dusted the shelves of books Sophia was too tired to read. She adjusted the curtains to keep the light from hurting Sophia's sensitive eyes. She replaced the flowers in the bedside vase with fresh ones that never had strong scents that might trigger Sophia's nausea. She did these things without being asked, without seeking acknowledgement, with a tenderness that seemed to come from some deep, personal understanding of suffering. For months into her employment, on a particularly bad day when Sophia's pain medication wasn't working and she'd been crying softly for hours, Camila had paused at the threshold of her room. Miss Sophia, she'd said quietly, her voice carrying just the trace of an accent, may I sit with you for a moment? Sophia, exhausted and desperate for any distraction from the fire in her joints, had nodded. Camila had sat carefully in the chair beside the bed, not too close, respectful of boundaries, but close enough that Sophia could see the genuine concern in her eyes. I know what it is to hurt, Camila had said softly. To feel like your body is your enemy. I'm so sorry you're going through this. There was something in her voice, not pity, but recognition. Like she truly understood. Nothing helps, Sophia had whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. All the medicine makes me feel worse. I'm so tired of being sick. Camila had reached out, hesitated, then gently taken Sophia's hand. Her touch was warm, steady, grounding. My mother, she'd said after a long pause, she was a traditional healer in Colombia before she passed. She knew things about plants, about natural remedies that sometimes helped when modern medicine couldn't. I learned from her. She'd looked directly into Sophia's eyes. I don't want to promise anything, but there might be things that could help with the pain. Natural things, gentle things. Would you be willing to let me try? Sophia, 13 years old and facing a death sentence, had grabbed onto that offer like a drowning person reaching for a rope. Please, she'd said. Please, anything. The secret begins. It had started innocuously enough. Camila began bringing herbal teas to Sophia's room, chamomile and peppermint to settle her stomach, ginger and turmeric to help with inflammation. The rotating nursing staff assumed they were simple comfort measures that the family had approved. Dr. Chen, during his weekly visits, noticed them but said nothing. Herbal tea was harmless, and if it brought the girl some comfort, why object? But Camila went further. She made a topical cream from arnica, comfrey, and calendula that she gently massaged into Sophia's inflamed joints. The relief was immediate and profound. Sophia, who had been unable to straighten her fingers without crying, found her hands worked again. The swelling that made every movement agony began to subside. The nurses attributed it to a lucky fluctuation in her symptoms. These things happen with autoimmune diseases, inexplicable periods of improvement before the inevitable decline. But Camila knew better. Late at night, in her modest apartment in the working-class district of Riverside, a stark contrast to the mansion where she worked, Camila maintained a small laboratory that would have shocked anyone who saw it. A centrifuge sat on her kitchen counter. Medical-grade scales measured substances to the milligram. Glass beakers and graduated cylinders lined a shelf she'd installed above her sink. pH meters and temperature-controlled storage for delicate compounds. Books on biochemistry, pharmacology, and botanical medicine filled a bookcase. This was not the home of a simple housekeeper. Camila worked deep into the night, extracting compounds from rare plants she ordered through specialized suppliers. She cultivated specific fungi in controlled environments in her closet. She synthesized delivery mechanisms that would allow active compounds to cross cellular barriers and reach the exact sites where Sophia's immune system was attacking her body. She was creating medicine, real, sophisticated, cutting-edge medicine, disguised as folk remedies and health tonics. The core formula was something she called the CM protocol, named with her initials though that significance was known only to her. It was a complex blend of anti-inflammatory botanicals, immune-modulating compounds extracted from medicinal mushrooms, and a delivery system using liposomal encapsulation that she'd developed years ago in another life. She disguised it as a nutritional smoothie, fruit, yogurt, honey, and hidden within, the medication that was actually treating Sophia's disease at its source. She brought it each morning in a cheerful cup with a striped straw, and Sophia drank it gratefully, not knowing she was consuming the most sophisticated treatment for Callaway-Brennan syndrome that had ever been developed. Within 3 weeks, Sophia's pain levels dropped dramatically. She could move without crying. She could sit up in bed without help. Within 6 weeks, her blood work showed improvements that shocked Dr. Chen. Inflammatory markers were down. Organ function was stabilizing. He ran the tests 3 times, certain there must be an error. Within 3 months, Sophia had energy she hadn't felt in 3 years. She could walk without her wheelchair. She laughed, genuine, bright laughter that echoed through the halls of the Ashford manor for the first time in what felt like forever. Color returned to her cheeks. Her appetite came back. She started reading again, drawing again, living again. The medical team was baffled. Dr. Chen proposed that the latest experimental protocol from the Johns Hopkins trial must finally be showing results, even though they'd stopped that treatment 2 months ago due to side effects. The nurses whispered about miracle remissions, about the mysterious ways the body could sometimes heal itself. Victor Ashford, desperate and grateful and afraid to question good fortune, accepted the miracle at face value. His daughter was getting better. That was all that mattered. He didn't ask how. He didn't investigate. He simply thanked God or fate or whatever force had decided to show his daughter mercy. He had no idea that the miracle had a name, a face, and a purpose. He had no idea that the woman cleaning his floors was the ghost of his past, risen from the ashes he thought had buried her forever. And he had no idea that everything, his empire, his reputation, his carefully constructed life, was about to come crashing down around him. The moment of discovery. It was a Thursday morning in late October when Victor's world ended. He'd left the house early for an emergency board meeting at Ashford Biomedical headquarters in downtown Westridge Bay. A Wall Street Journal investigation had raised questions about the original clinical trials for Immunoshield 9, questions about data integrity, about possible conflicts of interest, about the timeline of the drug's development. Victor's legal team was in full crisis mode, and he'd spent 5 hours in a conference room managing the fallout. By the time he returned home at 2 in the afternoon, he was exhausted, stressed, and thinking only about checking on Sophia before retreating to his office to deal with more legal briefings. He'd walked through the kitchen looking for his personal assistant, Caroline, who'd promised to leave some documents for him to review. The kitchen was empty, the staff on their afternoon break, Sophia upstairs reading in her room, Camila presumably somewhere else in the vast house. That's when he noticed it. A canvas tote bag sitting on the marble kitchen island, slightly open, with the corner of a spiral notebook visible inside. It wasn't his bag. It wasn't Caroline's. It must belong to one of the staff. Victor almost walked past it. He had no interest in invading someone's privacy. But something made him pause, perhaps the stress of the morning, perhaps simple curiosity, perhaps the hand of fate deciding it was time for truth to surface. He glanced inside the bag. Along with the notebook, he saw a small insulated lunch container, a water bottle, and tucked in a side pocket, a small stack of index cards held together with a rubber band. Something about those cards caught his attention. The top one had handwriting visible, neat, precise, scientific handwriting that triggered a flicker of recognition in his brain. He pulled the cards out. They were recipe cards, the old-fashioned kind with lines for ingredients and instructions. But these weren't recipes for food. The top card read, CM Protocol Base Formula Modified Version 7.3. Below that, a list of botanical extracts with precise measurements. Reishi mushroom extract, 250 mg, turmeric curcuminoids, 400 mg standardized to 95% curcumin. Boswellia serrata, 300 mg, Japanese knotweed extract standardized to resveratrol. Black pepper extract for bioavailability enhancement. But it was the notes in the margin that made his blood run cold. Reduce inflammatory cascade at cytokine level, IL-6 and TNF-alpha suppression without general immune suppression. Target specific autoimmune pathways while preserving defensive function. Delivery via liposomal encapsulation for cellular uptake. This wasn't folk medicine. This was sophisticated pharmaceutical science written in shorthand. And at the bottom of the card, in that same careful script, for my Sophia, may this give you the life you deserve. CM 2024 inch. Victor's hands began to shake. His vision narrowed. The kitchen seemed to tilt around him. The notation style. The specific abbreviations. The way the molecular interactions were described. He knew this handwriting. He'd seen it on hundreds of pages of research notes, on grant applications, on the original research proposal that had eventually become ImmunoShield 9. This was Dr. Camila Mendoza's handwriting. Not Camila Sandoval, the housekeeper. Dr. Camila Mendoza. His former research partner. The brilliant biochemist he'd worked with 15 years ago at Westridge Research Institute. The woman whose breakthrough research on targeted immune modulation had become the foundation of his entire pharmaceutical empire. The woman whose work he'd stolen when her laboratory mysteriously burned down, destroying all her independent documentation and research notes. The woman who had disappeared after the fire, who he'd assumed had left the country or perhaps, in his darkest, most guilt-ridden thoughts, hadn't survived the trauma of losing everything. The woman he'd betrayed, whose career he'd destroyed, whose research he'd patented under his own name while she'd lost everything. The room spun. Victor gripped the edge of the marble counter, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The recipe cards scattered from his trembling fingers, falling like damning evidence across the polished stone. She was here. In his house. The ghost he'd tried to bury was here, had been here for 9 months, living under his roof, sleeping under his roof, moving through his space like a specter of his sins made flesh. And she'd been treating his daughter. His daughter, who was miraculously recovering from an incurable disease. His daughter, whose improvement had seemed like divine intervention. The smoothies. The herbal teas. The topical creams. None of it was simple folk medicine. It was targeted pharmaceutical treatment, developed by the woman whose original research he'd stolen, refined and perfected over 15 years. She'd been healing Sophia with medicine she'd created, medicine based on research that Victor had claimed as his own, that had made him billions while she'd lost everything. The implications crashed over him in waves of horror. She'd been here for 9 months. She knew who he was, of course she knew. She'd taken this job deliberately. This wasn't coincidence. This was planned. But why? Was it revenge? Was she gathering evidence to destroy him? Was she planning to expose him, to take everything he'd built? Or was she? A soft voice behind him shattered his spiraling thoughts. Mr. Ashford. I wondered when you'd find those. He spun around. Camila stood in the kitchen doorway. She'd removed her cleaning apron. She stood straight, no longer carrying herself with the deferential posture of household staff. Her dark eyes met his without flinching, steady, knowing, unafraid. In that moment, she didn't look like a maid. She looked like what she really was, a scientist, a doctor, a woman who had survived his betrayal and somehow found her way back into his life. You, Victor whispered, his voice breaking. You're supposed to be, you disappeared. Everyone said you'd left the country. After the fire, no one could find you. No one looked very hard, Camila said quietly. It's easy to disappear when you're convenient to forget. Victor's mind was reeling. You've been here. In my house. Treating my daughter. He gestured helplessly at the scattered recipe cards. With this. With your research. My research, she repeated, and there was an edge to her voice now. Yes. The research you stole. The research you patented under your name. The research that made you a billionaire while I lost everything, my career, my reputation, my laboratory, 15 years of my life. The words hit him like physical blows. Every syllable was true, and they both knew it. Why? Victor asked, though he wasn't sure what he was asking. Why was she here? Why had she treated Sophia? Why hadn't she destroyed him already? Camila's expression softened slightly. Because she's 13 years old, and she's dying. And because I'm a doctor, Victor. Even after everything you did to me, I'm still a doctor. When I discovered you had a daughter with Callaway-Brennan syndrome, when I learned that she was being given up for dead because no treatment worked. She paused. I couldn't let her die. Not when I knew I could save her. Victor felt tears burning in his eyes. You saved her. My daughter is alive because of you. Your daughter is alive because of my research, Camila corrected gently. The research you stole and claimed as your own. The research that built your empire while I cleaned houses to survive. The full weight of his sins crashed down on him. He'd taken everything from her, and she'd responded by saving the thing he loved most in the world. "What do you want?" he asked hoarsely. "What's your price? What do I have to do?" Camila looked at him for a long moment. "I don't want your money, Victor. I want the truth." And with those words, Victor Ashford realized that his carefully constructed world of lies was about to crumble into dust. The ghost had returned, and she was demanding her reckoning. The silence in the kitchen stretched between them like a chasm, Victor Ashford on one side, his world crumbling beneath his feet, and Camila Mendoza on the other, steady and unmoved, holding the truth he'd buried 15 years ago. Victor's legs felt weak. He pulled out one of the leather bar stools and sat heavily, his expensive suit suddenly feeling like a costume, his carefully groomed appearance a mask that no longer fit. His hands still trembled as he stared at the scattered recipe cards on the marble counter, evidence of both his greatest sin and his daughter's salvation. "How long have you known?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "That I was here. That Sophia was my daughter." Camila moved into the kitchen with measured steps, maintaining the distance between them. She didn't sit. Instead, she stood across the island from him, her posture straight, her dark eyes never leaving his face. "I've always known where you were, Victor," she said quietly. "I've watched your company grow. I've seen your face on magazine covers, accepting awards for work that wasn't yours. I've read interviews where you talk about your breakthrough in immune modulation therapy." Her voice held no anger, just a weary sadness that was somehow worse. "I knew about Sophia within months of her diagnosis. It's not hard to find information when you know where to look." Victor felt sick. "And you came here to work for me. You planned this." "Yes." The simple admission hung in the air. No excuses. No justification. Just the truth. "Why?" Victor asked, though part of him was terrified of the answer. "If you knew what I'd done, if you knew I'd stolen your research, why would you save my daughter? Why not go to the press? Why not destroy me and take everything I built on your work?" Camila was quiet for a long moment, her gaze drifting to the window that overlooked the estate's manicured gardens. When she spoke, her voice was soft but firm. "Because I spent 15 years being destroyed, Victor. I know what it feels like to lose everything, your work, your reputation, your future, your identity. I know what it's like to wake up every day in a world that forgot you ever existed." She looked back at him. "And I decided I didn't want to become you. I didn't want to be someone who could watch an innocent person suffer just to settle a score." "But Sophia isn't innocent in this," Victor protested weakly. "She's my daughter. You had every right to." "She's a 13-year-old child with a disease that was killing her," Camila interrupted, her voice sharp for the first time. "She didn't steal anything from me. She didn't betray anyone. She's just a girl who wanted to live." Her expression softened slightly. "When I learned about her condition, when I realized she had the exact variant of Callaway-Brennan syndrome that my research was designed to treat, I had a choice. I could let my desire for revenge kill a child, or I could be the person I trained my entire life to be, a doctor who heals people." Victor felt tears streaming down his face now, no longer caring about maintaining any facade of control. "You're a better person than I am." "Yes," Camila agreed simply. "I am." The blunt honesty of it struck him like a physical blow, but he couldn't argue. She was right. She had every right to hate him, to destroy him, to let his daughter die as payment for what he'd taken from her. Instead, she'd saved Sophia's life. "But that doesn't mean there won't be consequences," Camila continued, her voice taking on a harder edge. "You need to understand something, Victor. I didn't come here just to save your daughter. I came here to give you a choice, the choice you never gave me." Victor looked up at her, fear and confusion warring in his expression. "What choice?" "The choice to tell the truth," Camila said. "To face what you've done and make it right. Or to continue living your lie and lose everything anyway." The truth unveiled. Camila reached into her canvas bag and pulled out a slim laptop, not something a housekeeper would typically carry. She opened it and turned it toward Victor. On the screen was a folder containing hundreds of files. "This is everything," she said. 15 years of documentation. My original research notes that I'd backed up on a private server before the fire. Communications between you and Westridge Research Institute. Email threads with the investors who funded our initial work. Time-stamped records of every experiment I conducted. Laboratory logs with my signature. Grant applications that show the development timeline. Witness statements from colleagues who worked with us. Victor stared at the screen, his face draining of color. "You have all of this?" "I've always had all of this," Camila said. "The fire destroyed my physical laboratory, but I wasn't foolish enough to keep only one copy of 15 years of work. I had digital backups, external drives, cloud storage. I kept everything." She paused. "The question is what I choose to do with it." Victor's mind raced. If she released this information, it would destroy him. Not just his reputation, his entire company would collapse. Ashford Biomedical stock would crash. The lawsuits would be endless. He'd face criminal charges for patent fraud. Everything he'd built would crumble to dust. "Why haven't you released it?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "You've had this for 15 years. You could have destroyed me at any time. Why wait?" Camila closed the laptop and set it aside. "Because I wanted to see what kind of man you'd become. I wanted to know if you were worth saving." "Worth saving?" Victor repeated, confused. "Yes," Camila said. "You were my friend once, Victor. Before the money and the power and the betrayal, we were partners. We believed in the same things, helping people, advancing medicine, making the world better. I wanted to know if that person still existed somewhere underneath all the lies." She pulled out a bar stool across from him and finally sat down, her expression weary. "So I watched from a distance. I tracked your company's work. I read about your charitable donations, your speeches about accessible medicine, your humanitarian awards. And I thought, maybe he's changed. Maybe he's using my research to actually help people, the way we always planned. Maybe the betrayal was a moment of weakness and he's spent 15 years trying to atone for it. But then I learned about Sophia," she continued. "I learned that your own daughter was dying from a disease that my research, the research you stole, was designed to treat. And I learned that Immunoshield 9 didn't work for her specific variant. I realized that you'd taken my work, you'd become a billionaire from it, but you hadn't actually finished what we started. You'd commercialized one application of the research and stopped there, focused on profits instead of pushing the science forward." Victor felt shame burning through him. She was right. Once Immunoshield 9 had been approved and started generating massive revenue, he'd shifted the company's focus to marketing and production rather than continued research. He'd been more interested in maximizing profits than advancing the underlying science. "I could have sent you the formula," Camila said softly. "I could have anonymously mailed you the treatment protocol that would save Sophia's life. But I needed to see you up close. I needed to understand what you'd become after all these years. So I changed my name, created false references, and got myself hired into your household." "And what did you find?" Victor asked, though he dreaded the answer. Camila studied him carefully. "I found a man living in a glass palace, surrounded by every luxury money could buy, who was utterly miserable. I found a man who barely ate, who worked 18-hour days, who couldn't sleep without medication. I found a man who was terrified every morning that his daughter would die. I found a man haunted by something he couldn't escape." She leaned forward slightly. "I found a man who was already being punished every single day by his own conscience." Victor buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She'd seen through everything, the mansion, the suits, the public image. She'd seen the truth of his existence, that he'd traded his integrity for fortune and had been paying for it with his sanity ever since. "I don't want your pity," he managed to choke out. "I'm not offering pity," Camila replied. I'm offering you what I said before, a choice. You can continue living the lie, or you can tell the truth. Victor looked up at her, tears streaming down his face. If I tell the truth, I lose everything. The company, my fortune, my reputation, everything I've built will be destroyed. Yes, Camila agreed. Probably. But you'll be free. Free? Victor laughed bitterly. I'll be in prison. I'll be ruined. You're already in prison, Camila said quietly. You've been in prison for 15 years, Victor. A prison made of lies and guilt and fear. At least in an actual prison, you'd know what you were atoning for. The words struck him with devastating accuracy. She was right. Every day of his success had felt hollow. Every achievement had been poisoned by the knowledge of how he'd obtained it. He'd been living in a cage of his own making, and no amount of money or power had been able to unlock it. The past revealed. Tell me, Victor said suddenly, his voice rough with emotion. Tell me what happened to you after the fire. I need to know. I need to understand what I did to you. Camila was silent for a long moment, and Victor could see the pain flicker across her face, memories she'd worked hard to bury rising to the surface. After the fire, she began slowly, I had nothing. My laboratory was destroyed. My research notes, or so everyone thought, were gone. I had no proof that any of the work was mine. And you? She paused, her voice hardening. You moved quickly. Within weeks, you'd filed patents on my research under your name. You claimed it was work you'd done independently, that our partnership had been peripheral, that my contributions were minimal. Victor remembered those weeks. He remembered the lawyer he'd hired, the carefully crafted statements, the meetings with Westridge Research Institute where he'd positioned himself as the primary researcher. He remembered how easy it had been to erase Camila's contributions once her physical evidence was gone. I tried to fight it, Camila continued. I contacted lawyers, but I had no money for a legal battle against you and the Institute. I went to our former colleagues, but you'd already gotten to them, offering lucrative positions in your new company to anyone who would support your version of events. The few who believed me were threatened with lawsuits if they spoke publicly. She took a deep breath. I was labeled as bitter, jealous, delusional. A failed researcher trying to steal credit for someone else's breakthrough. My reputation was destroyed. No research institution would hire me. No pharmaceutical company would even interview me. I was blacklisted from the entire industry. Victor felt each word like a knife to his chest. He'd known, vaguely, that there had been some unpleasantness with his former partner, as his lawyers had termed it. But he'd deliberately not asked for details. He'd hidden behind plausible deniability, convincing himself that surely she'd landed on her feet somewhere, that talented people always found opportunities. He'd been lying to himself, and he'd known it even then. I lost my apartment, Camila said. I couldn't pay rent without a job. I moved in with a friend, then another friend when that became too much. I applied for positions I was overqualified for, lab technician roles, teaching positions at community colleges, but my name was poison. Eventually, I took work wherever I could find it. Retail. Food service. Cleaning. The irony wasn't lost on either of them, a brilliant biochemist with a doctorate from MIT, reduced to cleaning houses because the man who'd stolen her work had systematically destroyed her career. I thought about giving up, Camila admitted, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. There were nights when I didn't think I could survive another day. When it seemed easier to just stop fighting. Stop trying. Stop existing. Victor felt horror wash through him. He'd driven her to that. His ambition, his greed, his cowardice had pushed this brilliant woman to the edge of suicide. But I didn't give up, Camila continued, strength returning to her voice. Because I refused to let you win completely. I refused to let my work, my life's work, exist only as your lie. So I kept working in secret. I took night courses in business under a different name. I learned how to hide, how to disappear, how to exist outside the system that you controlled. She met his eyes directly. And I kept researching. In tiny apartments with equipment I bought secondhand. In the corners of public libraries. In borrowed laboratory spaces at community colleges where I worked as a janitor after hours. I took my original research and I pushed it further. I refined it. I perfected it. I developed variations for different conditions. And I did it all without funding, without institutional support, without any of the resources I'd once had. Victor stared at her in awe and horror. While he'd been building his empire on her stolen work, she'd been continuing the research in secret, working with a fraction of the resources, driven by nothing but her commitment to the science itself. The CM protocol that's saving your daughter's life? Camila said. That's 15 years of my continued work. That's what I could have accomplished if you hadn't destroyed my career. Except I had to do it alone, in the shadows, with no recognition and no support. The magnitude of what he'd taken from her, not just the past research, but the future research, the discoveries she could have made, the lives she could have saved if she'd had the resources he'd stolen, crashed over Victor like a wave. I'm sorry, he whispered, knowing how inadequate the words were. I'm so sorry, Camila. I can't, there's nothing I can say that. No, she agreed. There isn't. Sorry doesn't give me back 15 years. Sorry doesn't restore my reputation or my career. Sorry doesn't undo the nights I went to bed hungry because I couldn't afford food and lab supplies both. She stood up, and Victor could see the exhaustion in her posture, not physical exhaustion, but the bone-deep weariness of someone who had carried a tremendous burden for far too long. But sorry can be a beginning, she said. If it comes with action. If it comes with truth. If it comes with restitution. The impossible choice. Victor stood as well, facing her across the kitchen island. What do you want me to do? Camila pulled a folded document from her bag and slid it across the marble surface toward him. Read this. Victor unfolded the paper. It was a press release, already formatted and ready for distribution. His hands shook as he read the words. Ashford Biomedical founder Victor Ashford announces correction to historical record regarding ImmunoShield 9 development. The document went on to detail the truth, that the foundational research for ImmunoShield 9 had been developed by Dr. Camila Mendoza during their partnership at Westridge Research Institute. That Victor had falsely claimed sole credit for the work. That Dr. Mendoza's contributions had been deliberately erased from the historical record. That the company's success was built on research that rightfully belonged to her. The press release announced the establishment of the Dr. Camila Mendoza Institute for Autoimmune Research, funded by a transfer of 40% of Ashford Biomedical's equity to a trust controlled by Dr. Mendoza. It announced her appointment as Chief Scientific Officer of the company, with full authority over the research division. And it included a public apology from Victor Ashford for his theft and deception. Victor's vision blurred as he read. This would destroy him. The lawsuits alone would be catastrophic. Shareholders would revolt. The board would force him out. Criminal investigations would follow. His name would be synonymous with fraud and betrayal. But it was also the truth. If I release this, he said slowly, I lose everything. Not everything, Camila corrected. You lose your company. Your reputation. Probably your freedom, at least for a while. But you keep your integrity. You keep your daughter. And you keep the possibility of redemption. And if I don't release it? Victor asked, though he already knew the answer. Camila's expression hardened. Then I release my documentation to every major media outlet, every pharmaceutical regulatory body, and every legal authority that will listen. I destroy you publicly and completely. You still lose everything, but you lose it as a villain who was exposed rather than as a man who chose to tell the truth. She paused. And Sophia stops receiving treatment. Victor's blood ran cold. You would let her die? No, Camila said firmly. But I would stop treating her myself. I would hand over the complete CM protocol to her medical team, along with instructions for its administration. They could continue her treatment without me. But you would lose the one person who fully understands her condition and how to adjust the protocol as her body changes. You would lose the person who has kept her alive for the past 3 months. It wasn't quite a threat, Sophia would still receive the treatment. But without Camila's direct involvement, without her expertise and constant monitoring, the chances of complications or setbacks would increase dramatically. Victor felt the trap closing around him. Camila had engineered this perfectly. She'd made herself indispensable to his daughter's survival while simultaneously holding the evidence that could destroy him. She'd given him a choice, but it was a choice designed to force him toward the only moral option, confession and restitution. "Why?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Why give me a choice at all? Why not just destroy me?" Camila's expression softened slightly. "Because 15 years ago, before the ambition and the greed consumed you, you were a good person, Victor. You were my friend. You cared about helping people. And I want to believe that person still exists somewhere inside you. I want to believe you're capable of doing the right thing, even when it costs you everything." She moved toward the kitchen door, then paused and looked back at him. "You have 48 hours to decide," she said. "Either you release that statement and begin the process of making this right, or I release my evidence and let the world decide your fate. Either way, the truth comes out. The only question is whether you're brave enough to tell it yourself." With that, she walked out of the kitchen, leaving Victor Ashford alone with the shattered pieces of his empire and the impossible choice that would define the rest of his life. He stood there for a long time, staring at the press release in his trembling hands. Through the window, he could see the sun beginning to set over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere upstairs, his daughter, his beautiful, miraculous, living daughter, was probably reading or drawing or simply enjoying the feeling of being healthy for the first time in years. She was alive because of Camila. Alive because the woman he'd betrayed had chosen compassion over revenge. And now she was asking him to do the same, to choose truth over self-preservation, redemption over comfort, integrity over everything he'd built on lies. Victor walked to the window and pressed his forehead against the cool glass. 48 hours. 2 days to decide whether to destroy his life willingly or wait for it to be destroyed against his will. But as he stood there, watching the sun sink into the ocean, he realized that the choice had been made 15 years ago, in a moment of weakness and ambition that had set him on this path. Every day since then had been borrowed time, a life built on sand that was always destined to wash away. Camila hadn't given him an impossible choice. She'd given him the first real choice he'd had in 15 years, the choice to finally stop running from the truth. He pulled out his phone and stared at it for a long moment. Then, his hands steadier than they'd been all day, he began to type an email to his lawyer, his board of directors, and his communications team. The subject line read, "Emergency meeting required, immediate." The body of the email was simple: "I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you 15 years ago." He pressed send before he could change his mind. Outside, the last rays of sunlight disappeared below the horizon, and Victor Ashford stood in the gathering darkness, preparing to step into the light of truth for the first time in 15 years, whatever the cost. Victor released the truth publicly. His empire crumbled, but he found peace. Camila became Chief Scientific Officer, revolutionizing autoimmune treatment worldwide. Victor served 2 years for fraud, emerging humbled. Sophia, now healthy and 17, forgave her father. His honesty had taught her integrity. Victor now works as a consultant for Camila's research institute, finally using his skills honorably. The CM protocol saved thousands of lives and bore Camila's name in every medical journal. Victor lives modestly, his relationship with Sophia rebuilt on truth. He'd lost everything and gained what mattered most: redemption, his daughter's respect, and finally, after 15 years, peaceful sleep.